So, with Kingdom right around the corner, I thought I'd go back and take a look at the previous season, Earthrise. Just as sort of a refresher for the next and final chapter of the Netflix Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy. Kind of like what I did when Earthrise was coming out, when I went back and did an episode-by-episode review of Siege, because I had already done a chapter review of Siege when it originally came out. Now I'm sort of doing the reverse, since I already did individual episode reviews for Earthrise. But hey, you know this. The title of this video is probably something like Transformers War for Cybertron Earthrise Chapter Review. If you want to watch my previous individual episode reviews, they should be in a playlist in one of those iCard things in the top right corner of your screen right now. But that said, I will briefly be going over what happened in each episode, as well as giving my final thoughts on this chapter of the War for Cybertron trilogy. In the first episode of Earthrise, we see Elita 1 and her small band of Autobots still on Cybertron fighting guerrilla warfare style against the Decepticons. They end up rescuing a group of Decepticons who have been put in prison by their own faction for unknown reasons. Meanwhile, Megatron and Shockwave discuss Project Nemesis. And when Elita's team is captured by Starscream, we finally see what this big secret project is that they've been talking about. Siphoning their own Decepticon sparks as a form of energon. This episode was a great start to this new chapter. I'd say that this episode was easily better than any of the previous ones from Siege. Maybe even better than all of Siege put together. Much more fast-paced, less talking, and when there is talking, it's not as monotonous as it was in Siege. I especially like Elita 1 and Jetfire's discussion about whether they should or should not be helping the Decepticons. Especially since he himself is a former Decepticon. All he did was flip that little panel on his chest around and now he's an Autobot. In episode 2, we are introduced to Double Dealer and his band of mercenaries. I like how there's a third faction in this series, but I feel that they were underutilized, their motives were unclear, aside from just money, and they lacked much flavor or character. Even Bugbite and Exhaust, who do have their own unique head designs in the toys and other fiction, are literally just straight repaints of Bumblebee and Wheeljack. The Autobots are briefly detoured by the Quintesson Decius, who gives us a tiny bit of lore, claiming to be the one who freed the Transformers. But Optimus Prime immediately contradicts them, so the whole exchange is kind of pointless. Decius then slices off their own faces until only one remains. While this was quite horrifying, I think this was literally only put in here to make the show seem more dark and mature, otherwise contributing nothing to their story other than that they're crazy. Back on Cybertron, Megatron tries to convince Elita 1 to join his side, hinting at their history together, but not really doing anything more than that. When that fails, the Autobots are about to be executed when they are rescued by the Decepticons that they saved earlier. Prime's Autobots escape Decius and continue on their way, but the mercenaries are tracking them and relay that information to Megatron. Episode 3 begins with Bumblebee finally choosing to become an Autobot. Wow, huge shocker there. Bumblebee? An Autobot? No way. The Autobots' only hope to reach the Allspark is to use the Nebulon space bridge, but it is currently being occupied by the Nebulon space station itself. Sadly, there are no Nebulons on board the station, unless you count Scorponok. Gotta sell that Titan-class figure. I never did pick up Scorponok. Oh well. In episode 4, the Decepticons arrive at Nebulon Station and face off against the Autobots. After an explosion, Optimus and Megatron have a spark-to-spark, which is probably the height of this series so far. Out of all the talking in this show, and there is a lot of pointless chatter in this series, this little powwow is probably the best in the show. This episode also probably has the funniest scene in the show too.
Well, Megatron, I've made my argument. What's yours?
Scorponok claims to be the last Scorponok, but we now know that that's not true from the latest Kingdom trailer. There's at least 2 more Scorponoks in that chapter. And this episode ends with an explosion that sends the Autobots and Decepticons into Unspace, or the Dead Universe, whatever you want to call it. Which is where episode 5 picks up from. Optimus Prime goes on a spirit journey with Skylynx, where we get a brief look at some possible futures. Or are they pasts? Likewise, Megatron is visited by his future self, Galvatron, who has traveled back in time to change his future, before eventually being pulled back to his own time by Unicron. But he leaves his former self with the Golden Disc, foreshadowing Kingdom and its whole Beast Wars-inspired dealio. This is easily my favorite episode of Earthrise, just because of all the cool little homages, and it actually feels like they're doing something for once. And finally, episode 6 sees the Ark and the Nemesis floating above the Earth, but they are both attacked by the mercenaries, who are being puppeted by Decius. Back on Cybertron, Elita 1's team infiltrates the Colosseum with the intention of blowing it up, but they are captured by Shockwave, and sadly, they are all destroyed in the massive explosion. Megatron steals the Matrix of Leadership from Optimus Prime, but the mercenary ship explodes, sending both the Ark and the Nemesis crashing to Earth, as we see Dinobot in his cute little raptor mode watching on. And that is the end of Earthrise. This was another good episode. I liked Elita 1's fight with Shockwave. She really is the best character in this whole series. But the MVP of this episode was Cog. Poor little guy. What a hero. Well, Earthrise was definitely better than Siege, but that's not saying much when the bar is set so low. There are some good moments in this chapter, and it does move at a slightly quicker pace than the previous one, but it still has a lot wrong with it. This season did give me some hope for Kingdom initially, but after seeing the Kingdom trailers, and hearing the leaked audio of Beast Wars Megatron talking,
"It is you, isn't it? Yes, Lord Megatron, greatest leader of the Decepticons, my namesake."
my expectations are not very high. So get ready, because tomorrow, we're going to be reviewing the first episode of Kingdom. Will it be as bad as I expect? Is that even possible? You'll just have to wait and see. So be sure to like, subscribe, and do all that other fun stuff. And I'll see you back here tomorrow for the beginning of the end, Transformers War for Cybertron Kingdom, Episode 1. See you then.